Welcome to another episode of Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students brought to you by the Union of Jewish Students of the UK and Ireland. I'm Amy, the UJS sabbatical officer responsible for social action and interfaith alongside special projects.
I'm Adam Duke, a student from King's College London studying war studies and history.
Thanks for coming on. Today we are joined by Rabbi David Mason, the Executive Director of Hayas and Jacob.
Rabbi Mason has dedicated his career to building stronger, more inclusive communities both within the Jewish world and beyond. Before leading Hayas and Jacob, he served as a congregational rabbi for over 14 years at Muswell Hill Synagogue and has been deeply involved in interfaith and social cohesion work. With a background in econometrics, conflict resolution, and Jewish scholarship, he brings a unique perspective to the challenges facing refugees and minority communities in the UK today. In this episode, we'll be discussing the refugee crisis in the UK, breaking down some of the common myths surrounding asylum seekers, and exploring the role of Jewish values in social justice. We'll also talk about what Jewish students and communities can do to promote better cohesion between different communities in the UK.
Thank you. So what first drew you to your work of refugee advocacy? Was there a particular moment or experience that made you realise this was the area you wanted to dedicate to?
So no, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's really good to be here. And shout out to all members of UJS and Jewish students across the UK, and wishing you lots of good luck in all that you're doing at the moment, which is really important. Well, when I was a rabbi, I was always really interested in what I call the civic, meaning what Jewish communities felt it was important to bond with the local community, to work with the local community, to contribute. So we have a saying in Judaism that all Jews are responsible for each other. Kol Yisrael Arevim Ze Bazeh. And I also learned that as a Jewish nation, as a Jewish people, we're responsible for the other. We always should maintain a sense of responsibility for the society around us. And that's something that burned within me as a rabbi. I worked on that basis. I was brought up in Edinburgh. It was a community which was a small Jewish community where you needed the outside, you needed the outside world. And so I learned to live in the non-Jewish world, so to speak, contributing. My great-grandfather was a rabbi in Germany who died in 1924. And he used to go for walks, I heard from my great auntie, in the hills locally in South Germany with the local parish ministers. So in Germany, imagine in the 1920s, before the tumult of the later decades after, he was still believed in local work with other communities. And when I was at Muswell Hill, we had a project locally with the Methodist Church to run a drop-in for local asylum seekers. And just seeing people with their languages, their cultures, their difference, who wanted to just live a life of dignity was really quite impactful on me.
Thank you. For those who might not be familiar, could you explain the difference between kind of refugee and asylum seekers?
Yes, that's obviously what we work in. My organisation, Hayas Jacob, as you mentioned, Adam, in terms of our work is to support refugees. We're a Jewish organisation that is led by Jewish values, but supports refugees. And obviously it's important to know what a refugee is, as you said. And that's really important. A refugee is someone who has a safe passage to receive humanitarian support in a country. So, for instance, in the Syrian civil war, the British government brought over a 5-year period about 22,000 Syrians. They were people that were brought from camps in Turkey and Lebanon over to this country. Ukrainians that came after the beginning of the Ukrainian war, the invasion of Russia, Afghans. These are refugees. There are people who are resettled to this country, and immediately on resettlement can work and can receive benefits and can build a life. Someone who seeks asylum, and according to the international law, the Convention on the Rights of Refugees, that is a right. So someone has a right to seek asylum. It's someone who has entered a country, not necessarily through an immediate safe path, so not what's called a regular path, but it's possibly an irregular path, which means they might have come over on a boat, they might have stayed over their visa, they might be at a university and have stayed on, and they don't want to go back to their country of origin because of persecution as possible. They have the right to seek asylum. If they seek asylum and their claim is heard and accepted, they then become a refugee. So in this country, the difference is that if I seek asylum, and there are tens of thousands of people in this category at the moment in this country, I'm not allowed to work and I don't receive benefits. And of course, that makes my situation incredibly difficult. I remember just very quickly someone in my synagogue once as well saying, people coming over the boats are jumping the queue. I said, well, the problem is in this country, there's no queue. The door is shut, really, in a way, for people who seek asylum, unlike those who are given main safe refugee pathways.
Yes. And that kind of brings us to a new area of the UK government has introduced increasingly restrictive asylum policies in recent years. What impact do these policies have on displaced people trying to rebuild their lives?
Well, I think fear, tremendous fear. I think as Jewish people, right, we suffered, not just the last century, but beyond. And there are many moments in our history, especially modern, where we looked for humanitarian support, when we moved from our countries of origin and wanted to be protected. And so for those, for instance, coming over on the boats, what is it, 30,000 a year? It's a very small number compared to the net migration of about 900,000. I mean, it's more, 900,000 more people come into our country than leave. But of that number, the people coming over on the boats is very small. And most of those people, if they were to have their claim heard, will be accepted. They're from countries that we will accept their claim. So what then happens is that when they're in this country, they will be detained. They might be in detention centres. They will be in hotels, and the upkeep is terrible. We have a case that we're supporting of an individual who's in a hotel where there's infestation of rats. And it's really hard, it's really for this person. So I think the policies of the government will certainly impact on the individuals, but also impact on the narrative of the country. If we look at people seeking asylum and refugees as threats, how are we going to integrate them and allow them to integrate into our country? And we also therefore allow a narrative to grow, which is that they are a threat. They don't share our values, they're diluting Britishness, all those sort of things, which I do feel as Jewish people, we should be really careful of.
Okay. With increasingly restrictive policies, do you think the UK is moving in the wrong direction on refugee rights? How does Hayes and Jacob push back against it?
Yeah, so obviously we had a Conservative government it was almost a race to the bottom for how anti-migrant, anti-refugee you could be. And so you had the bottom of that, which was this plan of Rwanda, which was basically to say to 300-400 people who were seeking asylum, you go to Rwanda, we're not going to see you again, you're going to be part of their program. We don't really know. We think we know how it's going to be over there, but we don't. And you're part of that process. And goodbye, good riddance to you. The idea was that was meant to deter as much as possible people from coming, which it didn't necessarily do. The Labour government has improved. From the bottom, right, they're going to repeal now the Rwanda bill. So that whole Rwanda thing is gone. There's a bit more family reunion. They're going to allow the right. So imagine the last government stopped the right of asylum seekers to be heard. That's against international law. Now there is the right. They're hearing cases. So people, if they have a case and it's heard, it will be fine. Our organisation worries that still this government is focused on security. And that's fine, right? We want a secure border. That's okay. But we believe that there should be a balance between security, control, and compassion. At the moment, the volume button is very much turned up on control to make sure that people are criminalized if they've come over on a boat somehow, add lots of different crimes, maintain detention if it's needed, show, and they're trying to do that we're sending people back if they should be returned. Well, that's fine. But there are lots of different things in the system. I'll give you an example. If I'm someone seeking asylum, I'm in government accommodation, hotel, somewhere else. Once I'm given status to remain, that means I'm kosher, right? I've got status to remain. They accept my claim to asylum. I come from a place where I would be persecuted. Could be for my gender, sexuality, whatever, religion. I'm then given 28 days to leave the accommodation, find a job and a new place. They've now doubled it to 56, only till June. So these are sort of things that make it really hard. And our point is, why make it hard if you've accepted people in? work with them to integrate them.
What was the motive kind of the extending it to 56 days just till June? Like, why was it so?
Because basically what had happened is that under the last government, because they weren't hearing cases, so people coming over by a boat, staying after they've studied, there were a massive 150,000 cases of asylum that weren't heard. This government wanted to hear those cases, but to remove that backlog, you wanted to, if you were to do that really quickly and hear them quickly, they were going to create a destitution problem. So all these people they'd hear, good, oh, we could say, great, we've heard cases, but then 28 days you've got to go from your government accommodation to find local council accommodation. If not, and there is a phenomenon of destitution, homelessness for people seeking asylum who are given rights. That's meant to be a really great moment. You can stay in this country, you've got a right to remain for 5 years, which can then be doubled, and then you can become a citizen. But 28 days gives nothing. Even 56 days is a lot. The other reason also is that people would basically leave the accommodation, they'd get benefits, but they would only come after 35 days. So imagine you're given 20 days to go, you haven't got any money. It doesn't work. So these are things that are not like, wow, wacky, amazing, big, but people don't know them. And if we were to change them, these wouldn't suddenly draw in millions of people to our country. But our perspective would just mean that those in our country, in the system, would be treated fairly.
Very interesting, thank you. And kind of before I hand over to Adam, I kind of wanted to talk more on kind of your interfaith collaboration within the organisation. You work with both Jewish and other faith communities to build on solidarity for refugee rights.
So one of the things, so our organisation does 3 things. We advocate, and I think that was an answer probably to a previous question actually you asked as well, in that our approach is very much about improving policy. So rather than just shout to the rooftops that the government is terrible and that's it, we don't want to do that. There's a need to criticise the government when it doesn't get it right, but also to praise it when it does. And we want to be at the table. So I sit with ministers of government, members of parliament, peers, to try and lobby them to improve policy. We also then work with communities. So we go to schools. We have Refugee Shabbat coming up at the end of February 28th, which we're really excited about. We've got 20, 30 communities. It's great that we're obviously doing this now as well on the run up to that. And then we also have a befriending program. So anyone who wants to, and we push this in the Jewish community, can become a friend of someone who's in the system. So I think in a sense, those are the things that we do. Ask the question again, just so I make sure I answer the question.
So Hyatt and J-Core take a how does Hyatt and J-Core work with both Jewish and other faith communities?
Yeah.
And kind of can you share examples of partnerships that have had a tangible impact, and kind of the interfaith networks advocating for better refugee policies? If you could just explain a bit more on that.
Yeah, so with that, what we're doing is building a network of faith leaders. And we want that to be a group of faith leaders that will impact. So we can write statements, write letters, write articles. We can talk to members of parliament that we all know and focus on specific areas of policy that we think together we can impact on. So it's work in progress. But we, for instance, at the moment, are thinking a lot about what's called community sponsorship, where local communities can sponsor a family of a refugee family. They've given a safe path, they can come in, and they're sponsored by the local group to help them and welcome them in. That's something we want to lobby on to improve, to grow, to develop. So we're really excited by that, actually. And I should add also, we are across the Jewish community. So all denominations we work with. I was in Radlett Reform Synagogue on Sunday night at their Tikkun Olam quiz. And we had actually got some funding from them from our Kol Nidre appeal. And it was just really good to see they're really interested in being active to support us in our advocacy, which is great to see.
Yeah. Adam, I'd like to hand over to you now to ask some further questions.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Rabbi Mason, for being here. So before we get to the student side of how students can help, I wanted to touch a little bit more on almost the Judaism aspect. So obviously we know that it says in the Torah to love others or treat others as you want to be treated, which is obviously very important, and everyone, no matter who they are, deserves dignity. And it's very clear that Hyatt and Jake are are at the forefront to ensure that asylum seekers are getting the dignity that they deserve. However, also says in the Torah, in Devarim, chapter 15, verse 11, that in terms of stocker, in terms of charity, there's almost a hierarchy, so to speak, not so much of cause, but in terms of proximity to you. So you start off helping your family, then your community, then let's say the wider Jewish community, and then you might even say of like Klal or Jews all over the world, and then even more, I suppose, in the community outside of the Jewish community. So that makes me wonder, given that is the case, and that's quite clearly elucidated, how do you respond to people within the Jewish community who say, based on that, and maybe based on their own beliefs, based on the fact that there are problems within the Jewish community, which are aided by all manner of great charities, who feel as a result that refugee support, where I suspect that the majority, if not all of the people who are unfortunately claiming asylum, as in unfortunate because of the situation that they're in, are not Jewish, that effectively that shouldn't be the priority, and that the priority in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of funding should go to other causes, perhaps what one would describe as closer to home.
I think the first thing I'd say is we were there. We were refugees. We came to this country on the kindness of this country, but many didn't get here. And many didn't get here also because of the barriers that were put up. In 1905, the Aliens Act that was set up in this government, in this country, was because of Jewish migration and the fear that too many were coming in, we're being invaded. So we've been there, we've experienced the barriers that people have to the other. So for me, it's logical that we would not want to feel that way and want to support the other and give others a chance. In the Torah, it says you should love the stranger because you were strangers in Egypt. So clearly it's part of our DNA. I often say to people this, I don't know, I've just said that, but people will say, we were strangers, we were refugees, so we should help refugees. And I always say, well, hold on. Does that mean if we wouldn't have been refugees, we wouldn't want to help others? It's like, it's part of our Jewish DNA. You should love the stranger. I even understand that as you should love the refugee. If you look at some of the commentators on it, actually, including Rashi, actually, and what they say about that verse, it can relate really to the other coming in, the refugee. Abraham talks about himself as a ger toshav, who's stranger from another land and wants to dwell and get the rights to bury his wife. It's something that we see. So I think, yes, at the same time, absolutely, looking after our own, we've got growing anti-Semitism, growing anti-Israel feeling. Those are really important. And for those that will come to me and say, how can you decide yourself? My answer often is, well, we're just one organization doing this within a wide span of organizations in the Jewish community that look after care, students, security, education. So if we didn't exist, and there are one or two others probably in our orbit, World Jewish Relief, there would be nothing on that. There needs to be a corner of the community that ensures that we can maintain our sense of responsibility. If we bunker down, I think I'd say this to all of you as students, really, as well as the community, if we bunker down and forget and lose trust completely in the outside world, I just think that's really unhealthy. It means that we'll bring up a generation that has really low resilience in its relationship to the world outside.
I think that's a very powerful idea, because I know that, like Pesach, we have to live the experience as if we were there. So just like we were strangers, I really do hear that. But I guess almost jumping almost from antiquity to the very contemporary times in which we live today, we see in movements, in organizations that by their own description describe themselves as anti-racism, there is within that anti-Semitic or anti-Zionist or anti-Israel trop or rhetoric that is used. So what I wonder is, how can you square that? Obviously, we're not justifying what they're saying, but when you're working in, I guess, quite a similar sphere, potentially working against people that may be inclined to be xenophobic or racist, so we're now working against those people. How can we square that in spite of the fact that it's public knowledge that there are other organisations which are saying things that are, well, anti-Semitic?
Yeah, Adam, that's a really good question. It's a really good point. It's a really important point, something I've dwelled on a lot. We have a problem because on the one point, as you said, it's difficult to find, if you're a Jew and you are naturally anti-racist, it's difficult to find your place in the anti-racist movement on the left.
Yeah.
Because Jews, the whole David Baddiel Jews code don't count sort of thing, which I think sort of works there. And I've said that to others in the anti-racist community, that they need to finesse a lot more the demonization of Zionism and understand what that does in that it breaks their solidarity, which is a big left concept.
Yeah.
With the Jewish community. But on the other side, there is a problem, I would say, which is that it's natural then when you're feeling abandoned by the left to then move to the right. And so I think there's a problem also, firstly, of right-wing populism and right-wing, actually anti-Semitism as well as Islamophobia, where people like Douglas Murray are often popular in Jewish circles because, hey, what does he say? Everything, he loves Israel.
Okay.
So if he loves Israel, we love him. And yet he also has hate, spews hate towards other minorities and fear of the other. I think we've got to be very careful. Now, what does that do? That means it's harder to find a place. And I set up a panel for Limud. We had Lord Mann, we had Philip Rosenberg, we had Sybil Sheridan on a panel talking about this. Where's the space for Jews? We need to have that discussion. We shouldn't lose our desire to be anti-racist. We were there at Cable Street fighting the fascists back. So we shouldn't lose it. And I think when we see the Trumpist, Farageist type of narrative, we can't hide from the problems that that has. And I think because we focus in our organization about refuge and asylum, it's often the right, far right populist narrative that we're talking about. So yeah, it's complicated. We have to be careful who we are with. But absolutely, there is a lot of work. And I think one of the things I'd finish that question with, answer is, we shouldn't give up on trying to find people within the anti-racist left, for want of a better word, that will listen to us. We have a tendency to sort of say, right, that's it, we're not working with you. Because we worry the toxicity, the reputation. We've got to be careful. You've got to be sensible, of course, who you work with. But there will be people, and I've met people who, yeah, they'll have a listen to you. Will they agree with you or not? I don't know. What will impact? I don't know. But we need to find them.
So I guess just before we move on to the final part, just I guess almost pressing you a little bit further on something you said. It seems within the Jewish community when almost like allyship, where you have this idea of an ally of the community and someone saying something, and then it turns out that maybe whilst what they said on Jews or Israel is great, other things not so great. So would you argue that rather than effectively dealing almost with the dog whistle mentality, where someone starts talking about racism, asylum seekers, Islamophobia, all these things, and then they act as almost a dog whistle to certain individuals, organizations you don't want to be dealing with? It's just a case more of just being balanced and understanding the nuance and the subtlety in terms of the perspectives in general.
I would say that anti-Semitism, and I probably this could to all racism, is often existing when an individual or group imposes what they think should be Jews on the Jews. So the problem with Corbyn, I don't know if you remember any of his, you might remember his party political broadcasts. Well, no, his messages for Rosh Hashanah and Pesach. They'd always try and create some socialist thing around the festival. And I'm like, look, man, we don't need your socialism. Like, we're Jewish. There are lots of Jews who are not socialist, but most aren't. So just and Boris Johnson, to his credit, whatever we say about him, he would just sit there, say the message, mispronounce, like as they do, right, the sort of festival day.
I'm a donor.
And just do what it is, just do what it is, man, And I think the same goes for the right, though. The populist right is they will want and Trump does this, Murray does this, they'll want the Jew to be the hard, straight, militarist, strong man, Jew. And we should resist being told what Jews should be by the other. That's where I think the balance needs to be. We should be happy with our diversity, willing to accept that there are differences within our community and not listen to it being imposed by others. And yet there is a difficulty in our modern world of the nuance of I can be, let's say, both pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian, right?
Yeah.
It's becoming really hard because of, I mean, I think Elon Musk probably takes a lot of blame for it. But it's been very hard. It's hard now to be so nuanced because of our social media world. But we need that space to grow.
I think almost building on that, dealing with almost the most idealistic group within society, students. How do students get involved in activism where they may not even know where to start? So I guess Activism 101, where do students start?
Yeah, that's great. And I was the JSOC chair in 1991-92 in the London School of Economics, LSE. I lost London region manager by about 9 votes in conference 91, but was very involved in the union a lot as well, doing a lot of stuff there against Socialist Worker Party, etc. It was good days. It was easier days, actually, in a way. So look, number one, be in touch with us. We're building an advocacy group. And we want students to be part of that so that we can work with students and co-create with students how we lobby. That could mean, for instance, getting students to go to their local member of parliament. It could be connecting students with their local city of sanctuary, borough of sanctuary. I think there's I went to Edinburgh University in November, and it was just a great opportunity to sit, converse, bust some myths, hear what they say. So, I'm here to go to JSOCs. But if you're here and you're a JSOC chair or whatever you are, then I'm willing to come to your JSOC wherever it is in the country and talk with students and listen to their opinions and work with you on a plan that can be local. I think the students will come and go, right? You're there for 3 years or what. Part of that, you're obviously ideally working towards getting good grades at the end and you don't want to be so involved. But there might be a period within that where you can do something and lobby on a specific change. And it could be working with our policy ideas, working with your MP, with your local council people, and therefore students will come out more aware of these issues when they grow beyond. So I think I would say, focus on lobbying. And if we do it as a student group within UJS, we also can, in a way, if we need to, protect ourselves from some of the issues, Adam, you were talking about before, about the issues around, anti-Semitism, etc. We can do it. We need to protect ourselves. We need to fight against anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism when it comes as it does. But I think there's definitely a place for students. So be in touch with us. hiaskjcore.org. You can sign up online and we can get around and hopefully I'll work with Amy as well to get to some of the Jewish societies. We have Refugee Shabbat at the end of February. That's 28th of February, 1st of March. So if you're doing an FND, I learned that one. If you're doing a Friday night dinner or something over the weekend and you want to speak about, we've got also some resource. We put a resource together with some sources, plus some sort of stuff and stats. I think I might have shared that with you, or I will share, Amy. And just do it. Be in touch.
Sure. So briefly before we end, as someone, I'm at King's, the treasurer of the JSOC at King's, and I happen to know that not all, but quite a sizable amount of the members of our JSOC and also other London JSOCs are often students who come from abroad. So if you could, very briefly in the time we have left, could you almost for either for the ignorant, someone who may not have been here, or for someone who's just been, well, I guess in bed for the last few years and just hasn't been looking at the news or whatever, could you just briefly explain what the situation is with regard to almost the crisis or the CBUS that we have in this country, why we have it, and how we can really deal with it in a constructive way?
Remember, I think that's not really good. I mean, remember, it's part of a global problem. So there are over 100 million people in the world who are displaced. Most of those people are displaced either internally or to a neighboring country. So firstly, we need to dispel this idea that there are hordes of people that are going to be coming to this country. People will often want to go through migrant routes, as they call them, through Europe, smuggled, because they might have a relative here. They might speak a bit of English. They might think it's a good place to come. But of course, they'll go to other countries as well. So the problem we have is that there isn't a really good enough mechanism for countries across Europe to share the burden of those moving. What the sector, what friends of mine, colleagues of mine are saying is if you want to stop people choosing by smuggle routes, create safe routes for them. They should be able to go to a local consulate, a British consulate, apply for an asylum visa. Good, you can have an asylum visa, come to our country and lodge the claim. So you could go and fly. You don't have to come on a boat. So that's one of the ideas that I put forward. So I mean that sort of globalizes it a bit as well. In this country, in terms of this country, we on the one hand say that we have a history of compassion as a country, Britain. And we have done good, Syrians, and obviously Jews that came here, kinder transport, the boys more. But we equally have this residual sort of worry of the other that probably goes back to some of the empire stuff that we haven't worked out. You read Satnam Sanghera, who's a great writer. He wrote a book called Empire Land. He talks about some of the sort of residual racism that might exist through the empire, the fear of this dilution of Britishness. And so that will then create a sense of worry and barrier. And we also live in a world where social democracy, centrist or centre-left democracy, is having to fight for its life. And where there is this tendency to say, you know what, I don't really care whether you're democratic or not, as long as you can deliver. That's the American thing, really. I don't really care. If you're breaking democracy, whatever, if you can deliver me lower prices, more money in my pocket,
Best quality of life,
a better quality of life, I'll go with you. Now, will Trump deliver that? We don't know, right? He might not. That's why there's an anti-incumbency at the moment. Last year, of all the elections in the world, 85% of them were lost by the present government.
Yeah.
So I think that means that there's a lot. It's very febrile. It's very unpredictable. Very stormy politically at the moment. And in that world, I think we still have a right and a responsibility as a Jewish people to push for values of compassion and responsibility.
So what are some of the most impactful moments you've seen from Hyas plus J. Cole's work in mobilizing the Jewish community?
I think there's sort of the small, the micro and the macro. On the micro side, we run a befriending program. So we have every year up to 50 befrienders, mostly from the Jewish community, who are befriending people in the asylum system. And so the stories of friendship and support are so wonderful. The impact that we can have on people through that friendship when they're coming up against a system which is often cold, very often faceless, difficult, that we can offer that really is wonderful for me. I think I went to a community just past Sunday night. We did a Tikkun Olam quiz. And it was just wonderful to see a community who were together with us in these values. They believe in compassion. They want to fight anti-Semitism. They were, yellow ribbons. We're all there with Israel talking about the hostages and the terribly difficult stories and trauma that we're going through as a people. But still wanted to give to the outside world, and just to see these people get together was really quite moving, actually, quite for me. And we have more of that to come, really.
Brings us to an end of today's episode of the podcast of Jewish students. A big thank you to Rabbi David Mason for joining us today to raise awareness and educate us to such an important topic. If anyone in this podcast or event on campus has been triggering, don't forget that UJS's 24/7 dedicated welfare support line is open. You can call UJS on 0207 424 3281 to speak to one of our experienced staff volunteers.
And don't forget to tune in next time to hear more incredible stories and meet some amazing people on Yalla, the podcast of Jewish students. But for now, it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me. See you on campus soon.
Bye.